Coming up, federal agents searching your aircraft may be becoming routine. The disturbing story. Flying a Super Cub across the Atlantic? The surprising reason why someone would do that. And the dreaded Toxler effect and why that might prevent you from seeing the airplane about to hit you. AOPA Live this week begins in just a moment. If you fly a general aviation aircraft, you must be guilty of something. That apparently is the view of some federal agencies, at least according to a growing number of reports we're getting here at AOPA. Hello everyone, I'm Tom Haynes. Thanks for watching AOPA Live this week. We remember the arrest of John and Martha King, and then there was the glider pilot Robin Fleming, who was ensnared in the secret no-fly zone in South Carolina. Now it appears that it isn't just the FAA that can stop you for a, quote, ramp check. Warren Morningstar joins us from the AOPA Media Center with the latest incident. Warren?
Well, hi, Tom. AOPA has been getting an increasing number of reports of guys in tan jumpsuits detaining pilots. Now, sometimes it's nothing more than a polite ramp check. They take a look at your documents and you're on your way. But sometimes these Homeland Security officers direct something much more intrusive.
They removed every single removable object that there was, as near as I can tell, from the airplane. Whether it was our personal bags or things that were part of like floor mats that were clearly airplane related, not our personal items.
Gabriel Silverstein and his partner were ramp checked twice in 4 days. Neither time were they told why they were being targeted.
These searches are occurring with more frequency and intrusiveness than we've seen before. Therefore, we are looking at the pilots' experiences and researching the law and making requests to the government for information so that we can understand the scope of authority, the proper exercise of the authority, and then be able to advise pilots on how they should be conducting themselves if they find themselves subject to such a search.
Well, now, Tom, as you know, the FAAs do state that any federal, state, or local law enforcement official can request to see your pilot and aircraft documentation. But the search of Silverstein's SR-22 in Iowa City went far beyond that.
Flew in on that plane to Iowa City, landed, taxied onto the ramp, and started to be refueled while we went inside to the FBO to put our next flight plan in motion. And it was at that point where two more tan jumpsuit Homeland guys showed up and approached us and asked for the same exact ramp check documentation that we had gotten in Hobart, Oklahoma. We had a discussion with them about the fact that we'd only been ramp checked 4 days earlier by their counterparts in Oklahoma, which was somewhat surprising to me now, 2 ramp checks in 4 days, given the fact that I'd never, ever been ramp checked by anyone previously. At that point, we looked out and saw that a number of Iowa City policemen, also in conjunction with one of the Homeland Security officers, was approaching the plane. And when I walked over to them, I was informed, not asked permission, but informed that they were conducting a search with the dog. They had a German Shepherd canine unit who was sniffing the plane already. And they then instructed me to open the baggage compartment where they believed the dog to have been hot, which I did. They then, again, not presented to me as an optional thing. And they then had the dog put his head inside the entire baggage compartment. He still seemed agitated. They began removing everything from the baggage compartment of the plane. And at some point in this process, which ultimately resulted in every one of our bags being opened and all our belongings strewn across the ramp for nearly 2 hours, I didn't believe this was appropriate. And I was informed that they considered themselves to have probable cause because the initial dog walk around suggested that the dog was interested in the plane and that I had no say in the matter. And that in fact, if I questioned them further, I was given 3 options. One was to remain silent at the side of the plane. The second was to return inside to the FBO, and the third was to spend my afternoon and evening in handcuffs in their police car.
We've confirmed that the Iowa City Police and their Canine Drug Unit were at the airport at the request and direction of the Department of Homeland Security. And they didn't find anything, by the way. But the larger question is, do they really have the authority to conduct such an invasive search of an aircraft?
Ever since 9/11, there has been seemingly an ever-changing landscape as to what the authority is for government agents to conduct searches and gather information. So it's very difficult to get a simple handle on what is appropriate, how far may be appropriate, and what's not appropriate. So this is something that we're looking into specifically so that we can be able to understand what the roles and responsibilities of everyone involved are.
Now, we asked Homeland Security and specifically Customs and Border Patrol what authority they have to detain pilots on domestic flights and to conduct such intrusive aircraft searches. It's been 2 days and they haven't yet gotten back to us. Meanwhile, AOPA has filed Freedom of Information Act requests on several of these incidents to try to find out how and why Homeland Security is targeting general aviation pilots. Tom?
Well, thanks, Warren. I'm sure that isn't the last we'll hear of that story. And you can read much more about Gabriel Silverstein's ordeal on AOPA.org. The contract control tower ordeal is over for the moment. Late Friday, the FAA announced all 149 control towers slated for closure would in fact stay open, at least until September 30th. A group of cities and other interested parties had filed suit to keep the towers open, and Congress had made it clear that the law that stopped the controller furloughs also gave FAA the flexibility to move funds to control tower operations. But, and this is a big but, the money for the control towers is only good through September, the end of the fiscal year. The sequester law is still on the books, and a whole new round of cutting begins in October. As Craig Fuller said 2 weeks ago, sequestration is the gift that keeps on giving. But this week, Craig joined the members of the General Aviation Coalition in a summit meeting of sorts, a heart-to-heart talk with FAA Administrator Michael Huerta on general aviation safety.
And it was actually quite constructive, and the whole idea was, how can we do a better job at improving safety of flight within general aviation? You know, at AOPA, we have been absolutely dedicated to improving safety for decades. Literally, the AOPA Air Safety Institute has been at work at this for, I think, close to 60 years with all kinds of programs. And indeed, when I looked at the statistics to prepare for this meeting, we have nearly 2 million interactions with pilots on safety-related training activities. And I think one of the things that came away is that training and currency are absolutely vital. Now, I like to think that some of the work we're doing with flight simulators is going to make a difference. I think the AOPA J by Redbird project actually gives people the ability to stay current in circumstances they might not be seeing as often. And they can do it at home, and they can do it without buying avgas or renting an aircraft.
A first for the Navy this week, the X-47B unmanned combat air system, you might call it a drone, successfully took off from the aircraft carrier George H.W. Bush and then flew for about an hour and landed at Patuxent Naval Air Station in Virginia. Next major test will be a landing on a carrier. Now, we don't know if the X-47B can autonomously sense and avoid other aircraft, but that's what AOPA says drones will have to do before they can be integrated into civilian airspace. Beechcraft has signed an Air Force contract for 35 T-6 training aircraft. These aircraft have been ordered to train U.S. Air Force and Navy pilots, not to be confused with the light attack aircraft contract for the Afghan Air Force. That went to Embraer for the Super Tucano, and Beechcraft still thinks the T-6 should have been chosen for that mission. Meanwhile, the General Aviation Manufacturers Association says airplane shipments for the last quarter of this year are up almost 10%. Turboprops showed the biggest gains, but even piston engine sales were up nearly 4%. How great of a length would you go to raise awareness for something you're passionate about? Would you fly a Super Cub from Oregon to Africa? Pilots from Flying for Conservation are doing just that. AOPA Live's Paul Harrop sat down with them. He has the story.
East Africa is wild, beautiful, and in many ways a place out of time. Native people live in a delicate balance between preserving a pastoral way of life and preserving wildlife that is both a treasure and often a threat to their herds. The situation requires a complex conservation effort, one two friends hope to raise awareness of by flying a 1957 Piper Super Cub from Oregon to Kenya. Michelle Laplace Toulouse is joining in the adventure with Alexis Peltier, who spoke with us from Ethiopia via Skype.
And we discussed it, how to do it, and we thought, well, I mean, it'll be a great adventure, and it'll be great to stop all along the way and do various presentations and talk about the issue of, wildlife outside national park, protected area, and the people living there.
The grass first, and then they put the planks on top of the board.
Michelle is just about to take his private check ride, and Alexis has thousands of hours, but he's never made the transoceanic passage.
One of the reasons is I'm dead scared flying over the sea, so that'd be quite a good challenge.
A challenge because the crossing will be VFR over the North Atlantic in a single-engine airplane. Once the Cub is in Kenya, it will be used in the conservation effort.
It's taking some of the rangers from different areas and doing survey, looking for traces of poachers, looking for traces of of damage to the vegetation done either by the local or outsider of the area. So it's most of it will be game count, survey, and a bit of police work.
The duo plan to take off in June, bound for Paris, and then for Nairobi in November. You can track them on Twitter, Facebook, or their website. They hope to reach as many people as possible along the way. You can see an extended interview with Michelle and Alexis on AOPAlive.org. Paul Harrop, AOPA Live.
Coming up after the break, Rod Machado on keeping an eye out and an oddity that's gone viral. Welcome back to AOPA Live. This week, Virginia has made aviation history. The Commonwealth became the first state in the country to have an AOPA Airport Support Network volunteer at every public use airport. This comes just as the Airport Support Network reaches 2,500 members. The success in Virginia would not have happened without the efforts of one man, Virginia Department of Aviation Director Randy Burdett. Randy is a former ASN volunteer himself. He says the program was a natural fit to help keep airports in touch.
I understood the communications value of having a member at each of the airports. When I became director, we worked very hard to make sure we had good communications with the airport managers, the airport commissions, but it was missing something. And the opportunity to talk to volunteers or somebody who was on the site much more often even than many of the airport commissions, people who had firsthand knowledge of what was going on and could share with us some of the challenges before the airport. So it gave us another line of communications, it gave us another opportunity to talk with the AOPA, and gives us another opportunity to fix problems and to reach solutions that were more creative.
AOPA President Craig Fuller presented Burdett with a presidential citation for his efforts. There are still airports that need an ASN volunteer. If you want to help, head to aopa.org/ASN. When you're heading off on a cross-country flight, there's a new service to help keep track of you. Lockheed Martin has upgraded its flight service automation systems to automatically monitor SpiderTrack's position reporting devices. If you have one, you can register it through the Pilot web portal, and Flight Service can use the SpiderTrack's info to alert search and rescue if the aircraft stops moving or sends an emergency signal. Can you look at something and not see it? You can quite easily. And that something might very well be another airplane on a collision course with you. In this week's License to Learn, Rod Machado explains the mysterious Troxler effect and how it can keep you from seeing that oncoming threat.
Hello folks, I'm Rod Machado for AOPA Live. I'd like you to try an experiment for me, and don't worry, this doesn't involve test tubes and beakers. Yes, I know some of you are disappointed. Maybe next time. I want you to stare at the flashing green dot in the center of this graphic and tell me what happens to the yellow dots. Go ahead, give it a try. You saw the yellow dots disappear and reappear, didn't you? Don't deny it. You know what you saw. While I'm in control of this presentation, I can assure you that I did not make those dots disappear from the screen. Those dots disappeared in your mind. Okay, let's try one more experiment and then I'll let you know what's going on here. What I want you to do next is stare at the plus sign in the center of this graphic and tell me what happens to the magenta circles. Go ahead. As you can see, or better phrased, as you can't see, the magenta circles disappeared. Once again, those circles never left the graphic, but they did disappear from your visual field of perception. Now, what you've just experienced is primarily the result of something known as the Troxler effect. In 1804, Paul Vital Troxler noticed that when you fixate your vision on a particular spot, a stimulus that might initially be visible in your peripheral vision begins to fade and then disappears. And this is why those yellow dots disappeared and the magenta circles blended into the gray background. Now, this happens because our sensory system tends to adapt to a constant stimulus. And with your eyes fixed on one spot, the eyes adapt to any stimulus lying beyond your center of focus. And for your eyes to actually identify the peripheral stimulus, you have to keep shifting your vision over short periods of time. And it turns out that the neurons in the visual system underlying the eye's rods and cones have relatively large receptive fields. And despite the natural tendency of your eyes to make small and involuntary movements, in other words, they shift on their own, but only through very small amounts. These movements aren't large enough to stimulate nearby neurons, so you end up not noticing things that move in your peripheral vision when your gaze is actually fixed. And this is why you don't want to fix your vision on any one spot for more than a few seconds when scanning for traffic. If you do, it's possible that a moving aircraft in your peripheral vision might disappear from your perception. Instead, you want to keep your head, so to speak, on a swivel, scanning in 10 to 15 degree sectors, stopping only for a few seconds in each to check for traffic. Now, would you like to see how this scan method produces better results? Okay, scan the first graphic again, but this time look toward the flashing green dot, then shift your focus to the right and left every few seconds. You should notice that the yellow dots don't appear to disappear. So the next time you're looking for traffic, scan in short, regularly spaced movements that bring successive areas of the sky into the central visual field. Observe each for at least a second or two to see what's there, then shift your visual focus to another area. I'm Rob Machado for AOPA Live.
Thanks, Rod. I see your point. He'll appreciate that one. If you'd like to spend a little more time with Rod's charts, head on over to AOPAlive.org and drop down to the Technique channel. You'll find a longer version of Rod's video there. And remember, you can find more from Rod at his website, rodmachado.com. And we're just about ready to unveil the new AOPA website, but you can get a sneak peek right now if you want. The beta version is now out there and you're welcome to play with it. We know there are probably a few glitches in there, that's why it's still in beta. But you can look, and if you spot something goofy, just let us know. You can get to the new site from the homepage story on AOPA.org. Finally, it's not very often that milestones are made in space these days. We'll leave you with one that you may not have expected. Canadian astronaut Chris Hadfield recorded the first music video in space. Commander Hadfield has really embraced new media and done a ton of things to engage the interest of everyone in space. And his cover of David Bowie's Space Oddity has now gone super viral. I'm Tom Haynes. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next Thursday.
Ground control to Major Tom. Ground control to Major Tom. Lock your Soyuz hatch and put your helmet on. 10. Ground control 9, to Major Tom. 8, 7, 6. Commencing countdown, engines on. 3, ground station, and may God's love be with you. This is ground control to Major Tom. You've really made the grade, and the papers want to know whose shirts you wear. But it's time to guide the capsule if you dare. This is Major Tom to ground control. I've left forevermore, and I'm floating in a most